What does maturity really mean? Well, we know it's there when a young person can reason wisely, manage their emotions, and ultimately act in a way that expresses a love of neighbor and God. But it's a lot harder to guide a young person of any age to be mature, especially on those days and in those intense moments when we are tired and frazzled with modern life. How do we take the time to effectively listen and guide a young person to become more mature and not just bend to our behavioral demands, whether it's in the home or in the classroom? Stay tuned for this first in a series of Live Sturdy episodes with Christian counselor Keith McCurdy.
Mountains, we all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to Basecamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Hey, Basecamp Live listeners, Davies Owens here. Thank you for joining us for yet another episode. There is a lot going on that I'm excited about. There's a lot more you're going to be hearing about. In particular, our good friend Keith McCurdy and I are formally collaborating. You're going to hear a lot about that come 2024, opportunities that we're going to be inviting you to invite us to be a part of conversations with you on your school campuses. And we're excited about bringing a wide variety of resources to help just this incredible need right now to raise the next generation. So there's a lot that Keith and I are stirring up, and you're going to be hearing more, including this particular episode is going to be the first in what we intend to be a monthly Live Sturdy series podcast. We're going to take on a topic that he's seeing right there on the front lines in his Christian counseling and the work he's doing traveling to schools all around the country. So you're going to be hearing a lot more from us. We'd love to hear from you. As always, the easiest thing is info@basecamplive.com. A shout out. It means a ton. Just where are you listening from? And what school are you part of? How can we pray for you? We just want to know where you are in the journey. There are so many brand new startup schools, legacy schools. We're here to serve, and we want to do it to the best of our ability. And with that in mind, I want to say thank you to many, many, many of you who have filled out our survey. It is still live for about another week. If you go to basecamplive.com, it's about 5 minutes of your time. Super helpful to get information from you on what's helpful, what's maybe not so helpful, ideas you have. We're looking at doing this, what I'm calling version 2.0. Maybe it's 5.0. I don't know where we're on the count exactly, but we're going to come out in 2024 with video and a whole number of just hopefully refinements that make the podcast even more beneficial and helpful to you. And as a thank you for taking the time, we've got a $100 Amazon gift card. We're going to be doing a drawing and be announcing that in early November. So basecamplive.com for that survey would be really mean a lot to me. Also, there is a tool that Keith has been mentioning as he's traveling around the country to different schools. Maybe you've heard him talk about this. There's a QR code he gives. I will just simply say, if you want to go to basecamplive.com/resources, there is a PDF that he has available, 10 ways to unplug your kid, which is really great and helpful. Also, there are the top 5 Basecamp Live podcasts of all time, direct links in there. So just another of many tools to come and resources that we want you to know about, basecamplive.com/resources. Keith is no stranger to Basecamp. He is a very well-regarded family and parenting educator and consultant. He's been at it for about 30 years, working with families and children and parents in the area of mental health. His ability to speak into the classical Christian world comes not only because of his raising of his own kids, but his role on the board of a classical Christian school. So he gets us really well, and he gets the cultural moment that we're in. And we're just excited to have these conversations with Keith McCurdy today, in particular around this issue of maturity. There'll be more of them to come. But for now, without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Keith McCurdy. Well, Keith McCurdy, welcome to a very special episode of Basecamp Live.
Oh, it's great to be back.
Well, many people out there are starting to catch on that you and I are actually spending more time together than we probably ever have. And I've been calling it kind of the chocolate meets peanut butter encounter. Like, this is really good. I'm doing a lot with parenting and you're doing a lot with parenting. We should collaborate a little bit more here, even more officially.
Yeah, I know. It's exciting. We're slowly trying to get rumors out that we're doing something together. I like it.
Well, and we're going to do a very full, dedicated podcast before the end of the year, talking about what 2024 is going to be looking like with Keith McCurdy and Davies Owens coming together with Live Sturdy and Basecamp Live, and this really deep desire that we have to come alongside schools and parents. I mean, share a little bit about where you're doing this area, because this is I think where a lot of schools and parents are right now is deeply appreciative to this guidance and wisdom. So what is your world looking like right now?
Yeah, I mean, I've been visiting a ton of schools this semester. I think I've just wrapped up 16 schools, and I've got a handful more to go. And really getting out to the different schools and really talking about how we can raise our kids during these turbulent times. With some of the highest levels of anxiety and depression we've ever seen, how can we better equip our children to function well in the midst of this, in the midst of a broken world? And so I'm spending time with schools, talking to upper school students all about what shapes their perception, how they look at the world and what affects that. Doing a lot of staff training about how to better engage families, engage struggling students, how to speak into identity formation, and then really doing parent forums in the evenings with the school, looking at, how we as parents can just raise sturdier kids, really sturdier, both with, practical, spiritual, just functioning in a healthier manner than so many kids are today.
And I think what we're discovering, we're at a critical cultural moment, meaning that the success of a classical Christian education is so dependent on active engagement in the home. We talk about this as in loco parentis. We're under the authority of the parent. We also talk about the importance of the church. The raw reality is that it's a very frazzled world that we're living in right now, and we need as much coaching and guidance. So I love where you and I are at in this journey. I think that what folks are going to be seeing and hearing more of is opportunities to come alongside and say, hey, here are resources, here's training, here's equipping, whether it be, as you're describing, in person on campus or even via web or via remote. There's just a lot of need right now and opportunity to support and encourage, because there's so many, especially millennial Gen Z parents, are saying, hey, I really want to do this right. And I don't necessarily have the resources I need from my parents or those around me. What can you tell me about school? And we want to say, hey, it's not just school, but we want to be part of that solution.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because we see something now that is very different than even 10 years ago, both from the side of the school and the side of the family. I deal with parents every day that are yearning for community. And what I mean by that is parents that come in my office and we talk about how to really raise their children in a healthy way. And the comment I usually get is, oh, yeah, we agree. But if we do that, we're going to be the redheaded ostrich in the neighborhood. They feel alone. And my point to so many parents is, well, if you were truly alone, I would not be as busy as I am. All parents are looking for this. So many parents are craving for a community of like-minded folks who want to raise children in a very healthy way. And so they're yearning for that community. And one of the great things in the world that you and I deal with quite a bit is that the school can help foster a huge part of that community. And those two things go together beautifully. Schools 10, 15 years ago really did not have on their radar nearly as strongly the idea that we need to be speaking into families and helping families in this process as well. So parents didn't recognize the school could be the community, and the school didn't recognize we can be that community in that way for parents.
Well, and I
see that changing.
Yeah, it is changing. And I think the tension has been the school's quick, rightly, to say we're not the church and we're not the home. And the church is saying, we want to be in your lives, but you're only in our building an hour or maybe two a week. And you've got all these other things going on. And families are, I keep quoting the Pew study, 20% of young families live within a 100-mile radius of their extended family. So all this is shifting. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is that families are kind of finding themselves kind of in no man's land, standing out in the proverbial school parking lot saying, how do we do this? And who can help guide us on this journey? So there is clearly, just looking alone at what you're being asked to come and speak on and the frequency. I don't know how you humanly travel as much as you do, Keith. You're everywhere all the time. So we got to figure out how to scale this better, and which is what you and I are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, what I continue to see is the need is only getting larger. And I think coming up with other ways and the resources we're looking to develop, I think we're going to better meet that need, hopefully. That's the plan.
So we are going to get into a specific solution tonight, but I want to just ask folks to bear with us for a moment, because I think it's important just to frame this thing up at the 10,000 foot. So we're talking about seismic shifts are happening across the world, I think, in terms of just how parents are equipped and ready to carry out the important work of raising the next generation. And then you've got these other influences that keep sweeping in that are perhaps putting unhealthy or inappropriate goals in front of parents. What are you seeing with regards to kind of the winds blowing in an unhelpful way right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, kind of the unhealthy goals in front of parents. The reality is, and I think we already mentioned this, we're at a time where we have the highest levels of anxiety and depression in our children. And yet we have more of everything for our children, more services, more resources. So something's a little bit of a miss. And folks that come into my office, what I continue to see, two of the biggest struggles is that we've bought into two problematic views as the goals of parenting. One view is an extremely behavioral view, which is, I just need to know what I can do to generate the outcome I want to see with my child. That notion that we can really control outcome. And that's, of course, pitched by so many books that are written about adopt this gimmick, adopt this plan, use this token system. As a head of school told me recently, he said, token systems can be great until you realize they're not portable. You can't take a bean jar with you on the canoe trip. I thought that was a great example, and that's one vein that has been pushed for, 20, 30 years, the idea that we can actually control behavior, which of course we can't. The second narrative that I think is another false target is the idea that, parents come in and often they just say, I just want Sally to be happy. This idea that the goal is our children being happy or feeling a certain way. I mean, that's been driven by the postmodern humanistic movement for the last 20, 30 years as well. Just this idea that how we feel is the most important part of who we are. I would argue that what the data shows us is the more we have chased that, the more unhealthy our children have become. So those are the two that I see. And they're often framed. Parents come in my office and you get one or the other. What can I do to change a behavior? Or how can I keep Sally happy? Or you get them both merged together. I just want my child to be well-behaved and happy. And I tell parents all the time, a well-behaved child and a happy child really is not the goal. Yeah. I mean, they're good to have, I guess, but they're really not the goal we should target for as parents.
Well, as you said earlier, Keith, that the ultimate challenge is because we're in a community, you want that community to all be singing off the same proverbial sheet of music. And if you're in that, what a blessing, because sort of the rules of engagement, if you will. I mean, practical things like, oh, wait, I'm not the only parent that hasn't given my fifth grader a smartphone. I mean, it'd be great to be in community where these sort of normative behaviors are standardized to some extent and people are in agreement and they're working together, because it's obvious that we are, as a movement, as classical Christian educators and parents, becoming increasingly countercultural in every regard. So unless we're locking arms and unless we have a common agreed upon mission and vision for our families, we're going to just continue to feel like you're describing, kind of the odd one out. And that's hard when your kids are pressuring you to do what everybody else is doing.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, even using technology. I was at a school about a month ago doing the entire visit was on social media and tech use. And it was just so comforting at the end to have a couple of parents come up and say, oh my gosh, we've heard these things. We've heard it on Basecamp. We've heard different things you guys have done before on technology. And their comment was, we felt so good about our community that we'd established around this topic that when we said no to our child about a cell phone and they said, well, everybody else has one, we were able to say, well, actually, no. And we could list a dozen families in our community that had chosen together not to go down a certain road with giving cell phones to little kids.
Absolutely.
And they said it was a game changer because they could identify in a community like-minded people. So I think your point is right on the money.
And we're going to, again, as you and I are kind of co-developing a lot of this, I think it'd be just kind of a quick visional idea here. Wouldn't it be amazing if we kind of help normalize, even beyond the local school, to say nationally we're part of a, just say no to your smartphone or movement or whatever it may be. And then others can participate. All of a sudden it's way bigger and it starts building traction. But you're doing such a great job working not only with parents, but with teachers and administrators and students. And so again, if you've not had Keith out to your school, sign up quick, because your 2024 calendar is filling up fast. And you and I are trying to get out together, kind of do a double header, which I'm excited about.
That's right. We're going to call it the Road Show, I think.
The Road Show, something we may figure out a way to brand it all with lots of the Live Sturdy Basecamp world. But in all seriousness, we'd love to get out to your school in person, speak to your different groups of people. And if you're a parent, let the school know we're available. I think there's a lot of things that you and I complement each other with, not only doing this type of thing and even doing a live. It'd be fun to do some live base camps from schools around the country. We're excited about that. A lot more of this to come. But for sure, we're available, and you can get a Basecamp Live website or Live Sturdy website and learn more about those details. Well, Keith, let's continue. I want to get down to very specific of what's coming, because there's a lot, but just kind of by way of a teaser, this idea is we're going to, at this point, probably once a month do a Live Sturdy and a branded Basecamp Live podcast. And then we're going to take on a number of specific questions in this series. So kind of give us a sense of what's coming up.
Yeah, I think the idea that, I'm excited about, I know we're both excited about, is a series of things just to start reframing this idea of raising sturdy kids. And I'll give you a great one. I've been to so many schools this semester, and a topic that's continued to come up, this is just one of many we'll cover, is, when we know something is going on with our child, but we can't quite figure it out. How do we baseline them? How do we calm their life, clear out all of the clutter for a period of time so that we can really figure out, is my child really struggling with something? Is there a learning disability? Is there an attention issue? Or maybe the act of baselining them solves the problem. And so we're going to talk about, in the very next podcast, we're going to talk about what is baselining, how do you do it, and what can it help you with as you're trying to figure out what's going on with your child.
I can't wait. And I think that's, it's almost like biblical idea of fasting. I think it's kind of like, let's cleanse it, reset it, and see what's really going on here. Well, we're going to go to a break. Before we do, give us a sense just on the back half of this conversation today. We're going to tackle kind of the first topic in this series that we're talking about. So what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, I think that, from the 10,000 foot view, one of the things we want to get right off the bat is, what is the correct goal? And I would argue, and we'll talk more about this in the next section, the correct goal really is not well-behaved and not happy children. I mean, those are great things when we have them. The correct goal is developing maturity. And so we're going to break down, what is maturity? Where does that idea come from, and how do we begin targeting that with our kids?
All right. Well, let's take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to jump right into that very universal question. And maturity is definitely, hopefully it's not a boring thing, Keith. I hope we can still have joy and be mature. So that's all I want. We'll come back and make sure that's the case. I want to mention an organization that I'm really excited to be partnering with. Most of us engage with businesses every day that provide excellent services, but are all too often actually funding initiatives and ideologies that are out of alignment with what we deeply value as families and churches and schools. And that's why Basecamp Live is proud to partner and do our banking with America's Christian Credit Union, a banking institution that only serves and invests in kingdom causes. So whether you're managing a school, a home, a small business, ACCU can meet your banking needs while upholding your biblical values. Find out why tens of thousands of families and ministries across the country have chosen to bank with ACCU by visiting americaschristiancu.com/Basecamp. Keith, we're talking about the idea of what is maturity. What's the ultimate 10,000 foot goal when little Susie matriculates from kindergarten into the senior year and she's graduating, and we want to be able to say she's not only wise and virtuous, but she's mature as an attribute. I would think that if you stopped and asked a grammar school teacher, their idea of maturity might be a little different than the senior's definition of maturity, meaning it's probably more, are they walking in rows? Are they being behaviorally correct? Mm-hmm. It seems like a hard definition, and parents are probably going to define it all over the map as well. How do you define it? Why is that an appropriate goal in your mind?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And what I tell folks is, I think we have to have an operational definition of the process of maturity. What really is it across all age groups? Because I think at different stages, we can define it differently when we're looking for certain practical behavioral things that have been accomplished. But here's the way I approach it. Parents often ask me, what's my favorite verse in scripture about parenting, which is, it's interesting because it's like, if I only know that one verse, then it changes all of my parenting. And I usually reference, if a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat, because that actually is a good one. But it really, if you want to look at a verse in scripture about really raising our children, it's the beginning of the book of James. That's the process work of raising kids. And I'll paraphrase: consider it pure joy when we face trials, develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work. The idea that, gosh, just staying in something and persevering is doing work on me, and it must finish its work so that we are what? Well, it's mature, complete. And so we get this picture in scripture that the goal is maturity. There's a goal of completeness and maturity, and we get to it through struggle. And so how then do we define maturity, and how does it connect with struggle? Well, virtually every teenager that I've ever treated, unless they're coming in with psychosis or a pervasive developmental disorder, those are very small percentages of the population. Other than that, I would argue just about every teenager I've ever worked with has seen a certain diagram that I draw on my board. And I'll say to them, hey, can I draw you a diagram of what I think your biggest, most significant daily struggle is, regardless of the issue that brought you in here? And they usually say, sure. And so I stand up and I write on the board and I spell out the word maturity. And right about the time it's almost spelled out and they see what I'm writing, they all go, oh, kind of groan. And I say, hold up, let me define it. And the definition I give them is this. Maturity has kind of three key components. The first component is a base of knowledge, knowing what's right, what's good, what's common sense, what's good judgment. I would even make the point that Deuteronomy 6, what it talks about with parents is impressing truth in the lives of your children. Let them know what is good, what is right, what is common sense, what is good judgment. That's the first part of maturity, having a base of knowledge of those things. The good news is most kids today are still getting that. Most children, when they misbehave or when something's off, you say, did you know what you should have done? They say, sure. Yeah, I kind of knew. So we're actually still doing a good job with that, even in today's world. The second piece of maturity is an emotional awareness. And it's got two key components in that. The first is that our emotions are very valuable. Our emotions, even though I pick at where we put them in our life sometimes and what we use them for, they're extremely valuable. I'll give you two things we see. Number one, emotions connect us more closely to the physical world of God's creation. The first snowfall, some parts of the country, that creates fear. In my world, I love the snowfall. I have an emotional connection to that. My wife and I visited the Grand Canyon, standing on the south rim as the sun goes down, just being overtaken with the beauty of God's creation. It has an emotional component to us. A second part of valuing we see in emotions is they give us depth in relationships. It's a tool that God gave us to grow relationships. So we know emotions have immense value. That's two of just many things we know. But the second part of emotional awareness is not just that they're valuable, but that they are unreliable. Now, this is a topic you and I are going to talk about in one of our other podcasts in the future, the problem with feelings. But in short, our feelings have a hard time telling the difference between fantasy and reality. Mm-hmm. So they don't, although they give us information, their information does not always discern truth. And so ultimately what maturity then is number one, knowing what's good, what's right, what's common sense, what's good judgment. The second part of maturity is understanding the value, but yet frailty of our emotions. They don't always tell us the truth. And so then ultimately the third component of maturity is when the two are in conflict. When I know the right thing to do, but it's hard, difficult, or uncomfortable, and I don't want to do it, I do it anyway. In essence, it's maturity in process is living as I should, even when it's difficult, even when it's hard, even when I don't want to. And I would argue that that's what levels the playing field at all different ages, because that'll look like different things at different ages. At different ages, in a grammar school, that may mean, are the students all standing in line when we ask them to when they don't want to? Well, that's maturity. In the middle school, it's a deeper level. It's different expectations we have. In the upper school, same thing, bigger expectations. And the idea is, can we live in the way that we know is good and right, even when it doesn't line up with where we are emotionally? And I would argue that that's the separator in students today functioning healthy versus functioning very unhealthy.
Well, Keith, I want to take a break and come back in a second because I want to unpack this a little bit more into the super practicals, like, on a day in the life of a typical teacher or parent. I think part of our perceived and right job is to sort of share immaturity. And I think what you said is really important, that it's more than just the external behaviors, because it's obviously coming out of your ability to regulate your emotions, your ability to know and perceive what is right and true. And so that seems like a really easy thing to make the mistake of missing a moment to help a child become more mature, because we're so caught up in the behavior. And then we end up becoming B.F. Skinner behavior modification people, or as you're talking about earlier, we just, we motivate with extrinsic rewards, we bribe them, we do these things that are not the way to bring about maturity. So how do you bring about healthy maturity, especially in the heat of a moment when the kid's being a monkey? Like, what am I going to do now? So why don't we take a break and we'll come back and see how we answer that really important question.
What if your students could find a college where education is rooted deep in the soil of faith? What if your students could be guided to deeper learning by teachers who weren't just smart, but wise? What if the higher education journey pushed your students to excellence and joy, even amid extraordinary effort? That's what happens every day at Samford University. For 182 years, Samford has equipped our students with the knowledge, skills, relationships, and experiences they need to tackle society's greatest challenges. See the Samford difference. Visit samford.edu/realize. That's samford.edu/realize. Samford, for God, for learning, forever.
Keith, we call this podcast Basecamp Live because the analogy is it feels like climbing up to the top of Mount Everest. Along the way, you're trying to raise this young person to maturity, to become 18, to get to the top of the mountain. And I think in our frazzled state as educators and parents, it's really easy in our impatience and our exhaustion just to look for the fastest way out. I've seen immature behavior. So either I'm going to rail out a punishment, I'm going to snap to something. And yet it seems like the best path is to take more of a slower approach to really help them to self-discover the things that they need to correct so they become more mature. But how do we do that, especially as busy educators and parents, to lead to true maturity?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I mean, number one, right off the bat, I think first we need to realize most experiences we have with our children are not emergencies. And because we get frustrated and we read our own frustration mean this is an emergency and I've got to jump in, fix it, correct it, hammer it, whatever.
Especially if we're embarrassed as a parent. Like my child embarrassed me.
Especially in public if we're embarrassed as a parent. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I told my kids when they were much younger, I said, listen, I said, obedience is important. I said, but it's something that develops in you. I said, but the one you don't want to get wrong is if we ever yell duck, because if you don't duck, you're going to get hit by something probably. But most
sage advice.
That makes it right.
Yeah.
But most other things are developed, and they're developed in a process, even obedience to things. And so we've got to understand the vast majority of things we confront with our children are not emergencies. They're not critical. And so we need to wait till our emotions are hair calmer. But then look at this as when our child is either in disobedience, they're angry, they're frustrated. These are moments that we can grow our children if we're willing to engage them and kind of, wander into the murky water with them a little bit. And so the question is, how do we do that? So I think of a student that's struggling, that has a bad attitude, that's reacting to stuff. The very first thing we do is acknowledge what we see. I mean, it's amazing to me the number of teenagers and younger students that have commented to me once their parents have worked on this skill, how it changes their whole perspective on their parents. And the skill is the ability to show a little empathy. And empathy, literally at its most basic form, is acknowledging you see where your child is. Hey, I can tell you're frustrated right now. I can tell you're upset right now. And just acknowledge it. When we do that, our children slow down just a little bit. Now, granted, sometimes it may take a few comments like that because it might be, oh, yeah, I am frustrated right now. They still may be pretty heated. But when we can acknowledge where we see them, their ears open a little bit. And the offer we make to them is very simply this. Let me help you figure this out. Because, the direction you're going is not good. The thing you just did is not good. This is not appropriate. I want to help you figure this out because I don't want you to continue making the same mistake. And when we're able to enter in like that, we then now have opened it up to, hey, let's talk about the right or the wrong in this. Let's talk about how you feel in this. Let's talk about why it's difficult to do what you know is right in this moment. And it's amazing to me that when a parent can begin doing that with a student, with a child, they get to a very different place than just fussing at them, giving them a consequence, or trying to force an outcome. Just that ability to acknowledge where they are, that it's a hard process, and engage them in figuring it out.
So how do you, just maybe take it one step further, because I could see, especially as you get in middle high school, actually, I guess any age, it could happen, that defensiveness. Like, wait a minute, I don't actually think I was doing something inappropriate. You seem to be overbearing as the adult telling me that. So how do you kind of help them own and acknowledge that infraction to begin with, if it's not obvious?
Yeah, I think number one, we leverage our position a little bit. and very appropriately. And what we can say to them was, well, once you calm down, I want to talk about this. Before anything else moves, I want us to process this. I want us to talk about it. Because most of the time when you get big pushback, they're still fired up. They're still in high emotion. And that's when we as parents need to realize not only do we need to not be overly fueled with emotion. If we see them that way, we just hit the pause button. And what that means is this: life goes on pause. Other things don't happen. That's the leverage we have, where we say, hey, we're just not going to do anything else. Nothing else is really going to move until we can come back and walk through this and talk about it.
Yeah.
And at that point, as a parent, we're more than happy to say, let me tell you why we have a problem with this. Let me tell you why that we think this is inappropriate. Or let me ask you, now that you've thought about it for a little while, what do you think the problem was with this? And in my world, when we can get beyond the heat of the emotion in the moment, those conversations go a lot further. And the appropriate leverage we use. Remember the passage earlier, if a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. Hey, until we solve this, we don't move on to the next thing in life, whatever it is. So that's an appropriate leverage to use that just says, we're really not going anywhere until we can have a meaningful conversation about it. Now, and then I think the other piece of that for a parent is, our job is not that they agree with us when the conversation is over. Our job is that we have appropriately expressed what we need to express, and they understand what we're saying. It's not that they agree. So many lessons in life don't fully gel with our children until they're out of our home. We're just trying to capture the best audience to share where we are and to hear them where they are as well.
Well, on that note, I think it's interesting because I think the broader cultural values of the day that bleed into churches and homes is that we've got to have, quote, dialogue and sit at the table and all come away with everybody getting, equal amount of agreement on whatever said topic is. And that's just not the way one parents. I mean, you really have to retain the authority role. And if something's truly wrong, you don't recant that just so you get agreement. And that's, I think, again, especially for maybe young parents, and we just look around the world, I think we're all just supposed to be friends and make this all work together. And that's not the position to get maturity as you're describing it. So,
and I think the other thing to think about too is, you're right, young parents and some of the things we battle, we have bought into the idea of the democratic family, that everybody gets a seat at the table, everybody has the same voice, everybody has the same authority. We have authority, our children do not. And we have got to be okay with a couple things. We also have to acknowledge they have free will. So we have authority, which means we may share things they don't like. And we may hold ground they don't like. We may hold a position they don't like. But at the same time, we've got to accept it doesn't mean they're going to agree with us or they're automatically going to change everything we want them to change. It's a process over time. And we have to accept that our children will leave our homes still cooking. I mean, the number of students that come back to me when I worked with them when they were younger, they come back to me to do their premarital or other issues when they have little kids, and they say, man, my mom and dad always told me X, Y, and Z, and I never listened. I mean, I heard it, but I never changed. But man, I got out in the real world and they are so right. And so we as parents have got to realize we just have to create the space to have the right conversations. Success is not, do they agree with us or do they get it in the moment?
Or was it something that could be all resigned with a bow tied on it in the moment? Because that, again, is not.
Most things are
not how it is, right? So,
yeah.
Well, Keith, there's a lot more we can talk about here. Thank you for these good reminders. It's encouraging to know, first of all, we're not alone. We are in a big community of other classical Christian parents who are saying, we're going to do this differently, and it's going to sometimes take more time, and it's going to be a little countercultural, but we're going to raise a generation that is mature. So thank you for those words of encouragement. And we're definitely going to be back together. Folks can look forward to more Live Sturdy series within Basecamp Live. We're going to tackle just these various top issues, really, that you're encountering after these big questions that folks are asking, that I think will help all of us go the distance of raising the next generation. So Keith, thanks as always for your time. I do hope folks will jump on Live Sturdy website, the Basecamp Live website. I hope that we'll get invitations to come. It's fun when you and I get to travel together and be on.
Oh, it's going to be a lot of fun.
So look forward to doing that. And as always, we love to hear from listeners wherever you are. Info Basecamp Live, drop us a shout out, and we will join you again for the next Live Sturdy Basecamp Live podcast coming up soon. Thanks, Keith.
Tim, why are students' affections an important part of education? This is a great question, Davies. Training students to love the right things and love them in the right way is a central component of classical Christian education. The cultivation of proper affections calibrates the heart and the mind of students to align with what God loves, and not only to love what God loves, but hate what He hates, so that we can rightly order our affections and live well in this world. And the proper formation and alignment of affections serves as a moral compass then throughout the lives of the students after they graduate and become Christian leaders and spouses and citizens. And so training those affections is a really, really wonderful and important and focal point of classical Christian education for those reasons.
Hey everybody, my name is Grant and I'm the producer of Basecamp Live. I want to thank you all so much for listening to this episode and remind you to take our survey, which we just released on our website. You can also find it in the show notes. This gives you an opportunity as a listener to tell us what you want to see more of and what you want to see less of potentially. Also, don't forget to give Basecamp Live a rating on your podcast app and share it with your friends. Thanks so much.